Hello, everyone. This is Lala, and today I'm going to be talking about road rules. Was always interested in the show because obviously it's one of the two backbones of the challenge, but I couldn't find it anywhere on streaming services or other areas, if you know what I mean. But I did find a copy of the first six seasons of the show. I downloaded it, it's on my laptop, and I want to watch it and talk about it. It is interesting because the first four seasons of the challenge was more closely related to Road Rules than the real world, but obviously Road Rules was cancelled a lot quicker than the real world is, and I don't think Road Rules has a very strong legacy, and it not being on any streaming platforms definitely has to do with that. But yeah, I'm going to give my original thoughts on the first six seasons. Hopefully, I can find the other seasons down the line, but we'll deal with that when we get there. So the first season is the first adventure, and I'm not used to watching a reality show that only has five people on it. I do know that Mark was in contention to be on the third season of The Real World, and because they liked him so much, despite him not being on the cast, they wanted to put him on another show. This is Bunham and Murray. I only recognize Mark and Los from the show since they're the only ones who did the challenge. Los only did one early season of the challenge, and Mark has been a mainstay on the franchise up until today, and he's the only other one who's had longevity. So I'm entering this with very fresh opinions, and I'm excited to dive into this cast, dive into the younger versions of some of the people that I do know, and dive into this almost forgotten reality show. So five people are getting their suitcase, which has kept to their vehicle as they have to walk to. So I guess that's their signal that they're getting ready to go. There is money in the suitcase, and Los has money too, and Los is a student. Kit is just a simple 24-year-old. Allison is a medical school student. Shelly is a 19-year-old recent grad, and Mark is a recent university graduate. They are driving to Nevada. The cast talks about getting condoms for the guys, and it seems like Los has a crush on Shelly. Shelly is a full blooded native person, and he kind of made fun of her last name, which is Spotted Horse, and she didn't think much of it. And Mark also made some weird comments about her name, too. Their first mission is landsliding, and whomever wins will get a hotel room. They go to the casino in Vegas and they had to split the money amongst the five of them once they go to the rooms. Their next clue states that they need to visit the youngest mayor in America, and they have 2 days to get there. They find out who the youngest mayor is, and they have to win a key to a city, the second mission, and they have to go to Mexico for this task too, which also involves them riding horses. So they do the task and complete the second mission. They then go to a club to get a clue, and the women were having a good time at the bar. They were on the bus, and Allison is especially very drunk and embarrassed one of the guys, which she called out on, or she's called out on this. Whatever was happening with Shelly and Los is essentially over, and they drive to Arizona. Apparently, Los kissed Shelly at night, and it's causing a bunch of tension where it might not have been consensual. The third task is dog sledding, and they have to set up their tent outside in the snow, which did not turn out well. They go to Oklahoma City, and Shelly is extremely homesick, where Los calls her Pocahontas, though I think this was before that movie came out, and they're just not getting along at all. Los and Allison have been arguing because he has been hoarding the money, and it's the Los that I remember from the challenge. Allison and Shelly are bonding over their relationship issues and not liking Los, but they go to Shelly's house to see her mother, and she has no relationship with her father. We see a lot of her family and community's native clothing, culture, and all of that. And it's interesting that we see this representation in 1994, but they've never really done it on the challenge. So they had the option to show more indigenous people, but they just didn't. They get a clue where they have to go to a farm in Louisiana to make some money. Los is arguing about whether there are buns in the van or not, and he's pissing off more people. Anyways, Mark and Kit are getting along, and there's another conversation about how someone else that isn't Los needs to hold on to the money, which leads to Los and the woman going back and forth. Are in a farm in Louisiana where some of them are scooping ice cream for a task, some are handling turtles, and others are separating meat, and then dealing with some of the alligators. Mark and Kit are getting very close throughout the entire episode, and the editors are making it seem like it's a budding showman's. Everyone reunites and goes to New Orleans for the next task. Los is creating a fight about whether people are splitting the money or not, and everyone is pissed off about this. But it seems like they agree to hold and to have their own money. The episode ends with them having fun at New Orleans, but it's clear Kit and Mark are vibing and they end up kissing at the end of the episode. Kit and Mark tell people right afterwards that they kiss one another and they both have romantic partners. They have to find the father of Jazz and spend the night with him for the next task, and we see them go to a voodoo museum where the person mentions that the next clue is at some graveyard where the cat has to spend the night there. Hell no! They do give the cats their readings, and not a whole lot is important in my opinion. Shelley refuses to spend a night at the graveyard because it is disrespectful to her heritage. I don't blame her, but the cat does get the clue the next morning, and they have to go to Florida. They are introduced to a naked man while in Florida, and there's a few named men who are in the area. A few of them have to get naked and streak in the pool to get their clue with one of the naked men. What a weird ass task that has aged poorly, and they leave to go to Georgia. We do see them get lost in the process, but their next task is working with a humanitarian event to build a home for homeless people or build a home, my bad. And the group talks to them about a bunch of spiritual stuff. Then they have to go to Atlanta where Kit is going to see her boyfriend. The cast meets Kit's loved ones. Mark knows he's much better looking than her boyfriend. And they meet to see Lotus' loved ones as they both live in Atlanta. Kit tells her boyfriend that she cheated on him. For some reason, Kit thought that her boyfriend would be nonchalant about it, but of course he is rightfully upset about it. But they all go to meet with some of their friends. Despite everything that happened, it seems like they are dancing, and we also see Mike's girlfriend at the club, and the entire situation's just awkward. Their next task is Bald Head Island, which is in California, where they have to walk up to a tower and then go to a fishing boat to get a bunch of fish. Lois is boat sick the entire time, but they then move on to skinning and cutting fish. The next task involves the cast going to New York, but they have to stop at North Carolina for the night, where Mark and Kit may have hooked up together. They then visit Washington, D.C., but were pulled over by the cops. New York traffic is such a bitch. So we see them getting trapped once they get there. They have to go to the garden with no flowers to find a clown, which is a building, not an actual garden. All five of them are dressed as clowns and have to do a bunch of obstacles in a circus, then watch the circus show. Everyone but Los went to a club and partied their asses off, essentially. Though they have to be in clown gear to go to the Today Show the very next morning. Virginia is their next destination, but they stop at Allison's house at Long Island to meet her family and friends. Los is flirting with Allison's friend, who is not interested in him whatsoever. Driving out of New York was just as hellish as it was driving into New York, and Allison calls out Los for saying his name, Carlos, incorrectly. But he really does not care. Or I think he was calling Karen. I don't know the situation. Anyways, at Pennsylvania, they get in trouble because Shelley left her ID in New York, but it's really a nothing burger. We are in the military academy, so we are seeing them do a bunch of military obstacles, the type that we see all the time with these types of movies and shows. I don't have much to say, essentially, but the cast, of course, passed their mission. Next, they are traveling to West Virginia, where they will be kayaking as a group, which looked pretty fun. The episode ends with them getting a clue about an evil marshal. Nashville, Indiana is the next destination, and most of the cast ran out of their individual money. They meet with the marshal at the police force to be a cop for the day, where they're split into two and will go with one another or one of the two officers to be a cop with them for the day. Some of them are pretending to be speeding ticketers, and others are pretending to be prisoners. After the task is complete, they get money, and there's a debate about what they should do with the money, and it ends up with Los and Allison arguing again, since some of them want to spend some money on hotels. The episode does end with Los shaving his head, while the rest of the cast are in hotels, and we see them react to it. Their next task involves going to some concerts in Indiana, I believe. During the drive, we have Shelley mooning cars, but we Sorry, when they get to the concert, they're actually doing work with managing, moving, and organizing things. Mark and Kit are still weirdly flirting and kissing up on one another, but it seems like everyone else is having a good time with this task. Our cast is now going to Chicago, and the cast decide to enjoy the city when they first get there, before going to Rockford, Illinois, where they're going to be racing a track with a bunch of other people. It looks like a lot of fun, but there really isn't much to discuss with the episode. We start the episode with Los going off on Allison, and he tells her to suck his dick, which causes her to cry. Shelly is trying to calm her down, but Allison is tired of being the bigger person, and she wants to smack him in the face, where she is tired of no one standing up for her. Kit tells Los that he needs to lay off of Allison, and his response, which was told to us by several people, is just Anyways, they're going to South Dakota for the next task, where they will go to Mount Rushmore. Most of the cast is running low on cash. I do like this element of the show, and it'll be interesting to see if it remains in future seasons. But they will also have to skydive in Wyoming, which excites the cast, and then they read their waivers. We do see them skydiving at the beginning of the episode. Mark follows Los in shaving his head, and they end up in Utah, where they are painting large figures in the city to brighten it. Their next mission involves them surviving outside, like they are living the wilderness, or in the wilderness of some sorts, with creating their own fire, etc., where they have to hike during the day. It is the season finale, and they are still hiking in the wilderness, though they essentially get lost and everyone is getting annoyed with one another. After this, they are taken to their final destination, and we have a montage segment of Mark and Kit for some reason. They arrive in San Francisco and they go to a spa where the twosome are giving one another the vibes and are very touchy with one another, and they hook up in the spa where they presumably have sex. The cast has their last supper together and go to their last destination in Santa Barbara. Allison and Shelley get tattoos before then, but they are going to Malibu, California, where they started. Of course, everyone is reminiscing about what they did throughout the season, and all their loved ones are there at the top. There's a box that has a bunch of stuff with all of them to bring home, or for all of them to bring home. I don't remember a whole lot about Allison outside of her feud with Los, which wasn't that entertaining to me, but she's handled herself well enough against him. Overall, not very memorable. I do remember Los from the Challenge 2000, and you definitely see how he was very argumentative, even on this season, though it was less intense compared to his one challenge season. He clearly didn't like much of the cast, but was more cooperative at least, but he's still very miserable and ignorant and arrogant. The only thing I remember about Kit is her affair slash romance with Mark, where they both had a partner, but it's interesting that people were hooking up on World Rules way before Real World when it comes to their roommates. I didn't realize she became a huge successful broadcaster, so props to her, and I did see more recent pictures of her and Mark, so they remained on good terms at least. Was interesting watching Mark's origin story since he's the only one here who has longevity in the MTV and reality TV space. In general, he's kind of the same with being the chill, golden retriever type, but his main storyline was his affair with Kit throughout the season where they both had partners, and he wasn't the quote unquote old one for once. It was nice to actually get an indigenous slash Native American person, Kiowa and Cree specifically, on an MTV reality show, which is still rare 30 years later. Hearing her talk about her heritage was very cool, and seeing how serious and kind of sheltered she was definitely is interesting enough, though she herself doesn't stand out too much. It was interesting watching this because reality TV in the mid 1990s really wasn't solidified yet, but obviously this would be the bare bones of the first few seasons of the challenge, which I was not much of a fan of. I definitely see why only Mark had longevity in the reality TV space, and I'm interested to seeing how Road Rules develops, where I'd have more of not an opinion, but more of a base on how to compare this season to and what to compare it to. It's okay television. It's not something that I would rewatch much at all. There wasn't a whole lot of drama. The interactions was not the most interesting. Honestly, my opinion on the season could just be due to the format of Road Rules, which might not be my favorite, or the future seasons might just be so much better. So I'm interested in seeing how things evolve from this point onwards. So now I am moving on to the second season, which is called Road Rules USA: The Second Adventure. I haven't watched the season yet, but just looking at the cast, I do recognize three names: Christian, Emily, and Timmy, and they're all from the early era of the challenge. Christian's a one season wonder. Emily and Timmy each had like 3 to 4 seasons, and just from looking at the list, the cast is an international cast where on the first season, everyone was from the United States, and the second season, only three of them are from the US. One is from Israel, and the other one is from Norway. I noticed that this was filmed a bit after the Real World London, so I wouldn't be shocked if with these 2 seasons they're trying to push the international thing when it comes to the international casting, which is why there are people from different areas of the world on this season compared to just casting all Americans. So I have watched it at this point, and I definitely like it a lot more than the first season. You can definitely tell that the budget rose not only due to having more episodes, but having more tasks, and they were a bit more interesting. You can definitely tell that the first season was a success, so they invested more into this season. I did like the cast a lot more, and I found the dynamic to be very interesting. I don't think there's an outright dud on this season like there were on last season, and even the people who've only done this have never even done the challenge. They are a lot more dynamic compared to the only people from last season who just did road rules, and it was definitely a fun ride, despite it being longer than the first season, where it could have been draining, but that wasn't the case. Emily is an 18-year-old from Florida. Devin is an 18-year-old from Ohio. Timmy is a 23-year-old from Pennsylvania. Efrat is a 22-year-old from Israel. And Christian is a 22-year-old from Norway. The cast is in Key West, Florida, where they are introduced to Mark and Kit from last season, who gives them keys, and they get to their trailer truck while getting their money. I guess it's good that Mark and Kit are still on good terms after last season. So they drive to Fort Lauderdale, and Emily and Devin are getting along. The cast goes on a tiny plane and land to partake in researching sharks in the Bimini Islands. Christian obviously has a language barrier, so he doesn't understand a lot of the jokes that are taking place. It is the next morning, and they're told that they will set up bait to attract the sharks, and they will be that bait and jump into the water. What the? The cast are continuing their research on sharks and are sailing on a boat overnight to watch people capturing sharks. They decide to go out to the bar to celebrate, and too much money is being spent on drinks, where they move on to taking off their underwear. Things are getting romantic between Emily and one of the guys on the island. So it's interesting watching this after watching the challenge. So she's always been like this. After flying back to Fort Lauderdale, they're going to the Real World house in Miami. So this was filming when the Real World Miami was filming. Interesting. And they have to steal something from the house without them seeing. Efrat is getting salty because the cast want to have fun with the prank, and she thinks that they are being a bit ridiculous, but it's really a nothing burger. They are getting staff to do this prank, and everyone is having fun. Now is the time for them to steal the 8 ball in the real world Miami house, and we actually see some of the cast. So we see Cynthia, Mike, and a suspicious Dan. Despite Cynthia's questioning, they did succeed in their task. I wonder if the Miami cast was ever told about this. Like after the Road Rules people left that this was all a prank. We don't know. Efrat is struggling to get along with the house, and their money situation is already tight, so there's fighting over it. The next task involves them kneeboarding, which did not go well. Emily and Devin are continuing to get close, and he is the first black person she ever befriended. They try the task again, and Christian is successful at it. Fred is missing her boyfriend from home. They go to New Orleans where they have to attend a Mardi Gras event where they eat a bunch of food, go in the parade, and create a Mardi Gras float where they will join the other floats in the parade at the French Quarter. Fred decides to smoke in a building. Tammy tells her to stop and she gets pissed off. You're not allowed to smoke in the buildings, and she just justifies it with saying, "Smokers smoke." She's honestly, we're just gonna move on. After the task is completed, they have to go to Mississippi, where Efrat decides to drive, despite almost crushing it and then freaking out because she can't read directions and wants people to give it to her. Ultimately, she decides to not drive anymore. They are dressed up as soldiers and they are being taught about the Confederate Civil War, and the person talked about how the South should have won, which obviously makes Devin uncomfortable as hell. Being at a Confederate site at Columbus, Mississippi is rubbing Devin the wrong way, and the cast is generally supportive of him, where Christian and Emily have to stay up all night at a spot with a gun. Some of them partake in their version of the Civil War. They complete the mission and then are invited to the Confederate ball for the night and are given the clue to the next location, which is in Emily's hometown. Devin talks about how weird the Confederate site is. He talks about knowing people who were toe tagged. Emily is shocked by this and she has never interacted with black people before. Timmy and the Timmy and Christian are seemingly bonding and getting closer. They are in Nashville and go to a club. Timmy and Efrat are getting close at this point. Anyways, they're in Nashville and go to a club where they meet Emily's ex, who she dances with the entire night. Devin gets jealous and then decides to dance with a woman the entire night. Once they get back to the location, they end up arguing about this when they're on the bus. This ridiculous argument continues, but they move on as they go to Emily's home, where of course the cast interacts with her family and eats there. Her sister got engaged, and we learned that she, i.e., Emily, broke up with her ex 3 months ago, and they were together for 3 years. And there's still some weirdness there, which we see in some of the interactions. They go to Emily's ex's house and have the awkward as hell conversation about closure and whatever before the cast stays the night at Emily's house. They go to the airport and have to skydive off the plane, and somehow Emily's high school pep squad comes out to cheer. It's just weird. Everyone was sad to leave Emily's family, but they do book a hotel for the night, where Christian decides to streak in the hallways and they go to the club, where Timmy is serving drinks and we see David and Emily flirting around. Efrat is emotional due to seeing a paper talking about Israel being bombed, and she talks about being born in the 73 war, so it adds perspective and context to her. They go to a university where they have to get students to register people to vote. Emily and Devin are cuddling at the restaurant, and Christian is kind of lightly grilling them about it, but they get their clue about meeting an Elvis impersonator. They cannot afford their $400 bill at the restaurant, so they have to work at the restaurant to pay it off. Emily is annoyed that Devin is embarrassed about it, and she's in a slightly pissy mood, and I think it kind of foreshadows their fate. They go to some sort of amphitheater to see an Elvis impersonator, and Efrat is becoming more and more of a loner. They have to do a task, but Efrat is nowhere around, and there's some bickering going on about it, especially when they find her in the room, or Emily finds her in one of the rooms, and everyone is losing their cool about it since they're supposed to leave already. They're arguing with one another. Devin and Efrat really go at it against one another when she arrives. They do go to a restaurant to work. Timmy and Christian have to dress like Elvis to get money, and Emily and Efrat are working as cooks in the kitchen, but they end up arguing during a smoke break about the morning's events, and Efrat deflects by mentioning Emily and Devin disappearing at some point in the past. The mission is complete, and Devin and Efrat do end up making amends. They travel to a rodeo ranch where they have to go and be bait for a bull on the field, in addition to riding on the bull on the field. It's honestly not fun watching this, especially with me having to research that bulls really do not enjoy bull riding at all, and you can tell by their aggression. The next task involves them calling someone, but Christian ends up arguing with Emily and David, and it's a nothing burger essentially, and they move on like 5 minutes later. The next mission involves producing a news show, and they each have different roles to make this news broadcast successful, which they completed. They are leaving Texas to go to New Mexico, where they compete in a snowbox derby race. Efrat is still struggling with fitting in and feels like she was not involved in the decision making, which causes another argument because the other's PR negative attitude, with another argument between herself and Devin. After they build the snowbox machine, they end up testing it out on the race, which looks really fun, and they have a snowball fight at the end of the episode. Phoenix, Arizona is their next destination, and we learned that Timmy was a mascot that he was recently fired from, so this next task means a lot to him. They are too broke to book a hotel for the night, so they decide to sneak into the swimming pool at the hotel, and Emily feels a way about Devin speaking to his ex on the phone. Christian got sick due to streaking in the cold. Duh! And they have to do the job without him. After a bunch of tasks at the baseball field, they have to audition to sing the national anthem. They have to look at some coordinates to find the clue for the next task. Emily wanted to watch the sunset, and David thinks it's lame, so there's a lack of compatibility between the two, and he decides to call his ex again. Of course, there's awkwardness between the two of them the next morning, which leads to another argument between them and in the next morning, and all of their issues are coming out, where it isn't working out between them at all. The next destination is Utah, where they have to ride their bikes down a steep trail. They go to a restaurant and meet with Christian's father, who flew from Norway. Everyone is talking about love, and Emily is very down on love, and Everett gives David genuine advice about his situation with Emily. Another argument happens between Devin and Emily, where they're trying to figure out what are their plans after the show, but they're both 18 who don't really have their futures together. They seemingly make up at the end of the episode. They are traveling to Las Vegas and try to go to the casino, but Emily and David are too young to enter. Efrat is celebrating a holiday, so she is by herself and is waiting for Timmy to pick her up. But they show up 2 hours late. Honestly, she would have been very justified in going off here, but she kept it cool, shockingly. Their next task involves them flying a plane, and they complete the mission, where the episode was very easygoing. Los Angeles is their next destination, and they meet Chris Farley as one of them is working alongside him on a set, the other one is a driver on the set, the other one is doing manual labor, and one is doing laundry, and the last one is a coffee boy. So they're essentially working on a set for their next challenge. Emily is salty that Efrat is working alongside Chris, and after she leaves, Efrat rants about it, which Emily hears, so she rants to some of the guys about it, and she's just doing way too much, threatening Carm with hammers and all that stuff. The cast is talking about their first impressions of one another, and the two women end up making up, of course. Efrat is struggling with the fact that the journey is ending soon, and they'll go back home after their 2 month journey, and she sucks with saying goodbyes. I'm shocked that it took 2 months to film this. I didn't know the exact timeline, but good to know. They pack their stuff and move out of the van because they are flying to Alaska, so they won't need it anymore. The same conversation is taking place where Emily wants to plan her future with David and move in, where he just wants them to stay friends and there's too much attachment. It's clear he doesn't like her the same way. They have to bungee jump off whatever they're on at this point in the episode, and it's their final task, I believe. It is the season finale where Efrat refuses to jump and the rest of the cast does it, but there needs to be one more jump to get the key, and Efrat decides to do it. They accomplish their final mission and they have a final dinner to celebrate the 2.5 months that they all spent together. Christian and Timmy plan to be friends forever. I doubt that's the case, and they didn't do a challenge season together for us to validate whether this took place, and no one dislikes one another anymore. Emily and Devin agree to being just friends, though she wants more. Honestly, I will say that he did the right thing instead of leading her on and dragging it out when he clearly didn't feel the same way. They all drive to their final destination where they each get a car, but it is an emotional goodbye within the cast. So, brief cast opinions. Christian's pretty much how I expected him to be based on what I watched of him in Extreme Challenge. Really easygoing guy who loved the challenges, though there was no awkward wee scandal here, so I guess he was better. Devin was definitely very refreshing. He was very young at 18. There's obviously stuff regarding his race that was going to come up. He got into arguments and stuff like that. And he was opinionated, but he wasn't really toxic. But you could definitely tell that there was a lot of immaturity there, which I even think he kind of acknowledged. Fred annoyed the hell out of me a lot of times throughout the season, as she was just so stubborn and didn't really seem to care about others' opinions or viewpoints. But there was definitely a more sympathetic side to her at various points in the season that made her more complex. So obviously, I knew about Emily's craziness and being good TV from 3 seasons she did in the challenge, but whoa, I definitely see why they wanted to cast her here. She was getting into showmances, a bunch of fights. She was very opinionated, and she was arguably the standout of the show. So I definitely get more of the lore of Emily now. So Timothy kind of played, or Timmy, my bad, kind of played the same role that he always does with being the older guy in the group, kind of like Mark does, who's not in any of the drama. But I felt like he was more under the radar here, where at least Mark had the cheating storyline last season, and he wasn't as funny as he would later be in the challenge. So yeah. And that concludes my coverage for Road Rules USA, the second adventure. I did see a more recent picture of Timmy and Christian, so it looks like they still are pretty friendly, if not friends. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed this season, and it's interesting now that I'm rewatching the show and the early real world seasons. I'm starting to see more of the appeal of the early challenge seasons, and I'm getting more and more invested in the early challengers that were on these early seasons. So yeah, I'm getting interested in it. I do think this was a great upgrade from the first season, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the series evolves from here. So on to the third season of World Wars, which is in Europe. I do recognize all four of the people who were on the challenge, though they each only did one season, and most of them didn't get much of an edit on the challenge. So in a way, I'm entering the season very blind. And I definitely noticed that they're casting more people from international areas. This was around the time where it seemed like they were doing that, especially on the real world too. And this is in Europe, so clearly the budget rose. Okay, so I actually watched the season now, and I do like it. You can definitely tell that the budget went up, not only because they decided to have the season in Europe, but they started doing 2 seasons a year at this point. So Road Rules was clearly very successful at this point. It was interesting seeing a lot more of the cast here who only did one season of the challenge and barely got any screen time. So it was nice to get to know many of them and to watch it. I did like the locations that they chose, but I don't think it's as epic as the second season, but it isn't as milquetoast as the first, or uncomfortable as the first season, in my opinion. There are still a few here who didn't really get much to do at but overall, it's a fun enough season. Michelle meets up with Chris at his house as they are the only Americans on this cast, and they are flying to Barcelona, and there's a clue on her bag about their first location. Antoine, Patrice, and Bilou meet with the other three in Barcelona, where Christian from last season introduces them. So I wonder if someone from last season introducing them in the first episode is going to be a tradition from here on out. And they have to go to a festival the next morning. So it involves balls being unleashed and the people have to run from it. I really hate this and I did enjoy watching it. But just like last season, I don't like anything that involves balls. They end up completing the mission and are getting to know one another. Antoine is more traveled than everyone else, so they rely on him a lot, and we'll kind of see how this starts to backfire in a few episodes. And they watch women do a Spanish dance, but everyone's really getting along at this point. Chris and Michelle are getting very close, and so is Antoine and Bilou. So there's two emerging slash potential romances, seemingly at this point. Bilou has a boyfriend, and at this point, I was wondering if it's the same person that she has the baby with on the challenge. And even after watching it, I am wondering that too. Antoine is a bit wishy washy and starts snapping because they were not paying attention to the directions while they were driving. So it's an immediate change of personality, and I believe he shaved his head too. Their second task is to launch fireworks, and they have to travel to France to do it. Bilou is having a bunch of relationship issues with her boyfriend and caught too much feelings for Antoine too quickly, which, wow. Their next task involves heights and having a walk down a mountain wall. Then they have to go into the water as they are walking down a pathway where the water trials walking down a waterfall, essentially. The episode ends with them all having a good time at dinner. After spending 3 days at their current location, they do end up leaving and are now low on cash. Michelle crashes the car, and this part kind of creeped me out knowing her fate in real life, but they are now in Cannes as they are now on a huge yacht that they have to clean. Antoine is getting sick and tired of Baloo and she's starting to go off. So this is the Baloo that I recognize. And the next task is about raising money. And I think it's $1,000 that they have to raise and invite people to their yacht for a party. They travel to Lake Como, Italy, where they have to do some sort of race through water skiing, kayaking, and rowboating. Baloo has yet another breakdown, and it leads to another argument between her and Antoine, where the other surmise it as sexual tension. Somehow Patrice gets involved, and it's just an utter disaster. Overall, it was fun watching them complete this task, and they are going to Venice. Mom is freaking out because she temporarily lost her ID and then freaks out yet again for losing her backpack. But her antics are getting tiring to everyone at this point. It is the next morning, they are eating breakfast, and she's initially calm, but something about the way that Antoine reacted when she greeted him completely set her off. So not only did she try to hit him, but she pulled a knife on him too at the table. After this, Antoine approaches her angrily, and they are grabbing one another where they have to be separated, and it's a complete and utter disaster. They go to do their next task, where it involves cooking and serving food before going to Amsterdam. They all get in their flight, and they cannot wait to meet Baloo's boyfriend since she is from Amsterdam, so they're going there. But when they meet her boyfriend, there's a lot of tension, and there's arguing between Baloo and her boyfriend since he was not expecting them to stay at the apartment, but they eventually leave. Overall, her boyfriend's attitude is just shitty as hell, and there's been commentary about how the relationship is relatively toxic, but all the roommates notice just the weirdness between the two of them. Their next task is boxing, which we have to watch for a lot of the episode, and they end up biking. We do see more arguing with Baloo and her boyfriend at the end of the episode. We then see the cast going to a seal rescue center where they are trying to help the seals recover from their environment and whatever else that they're going through before sending them back to a safe environment, so the cast has to help take care of them. A catwalk or a runway is mentioned in the next task, and they realize that their next destination is Paris. There is an issue since they have absolutely no money, so they have to do some weird tasks and begging to get some money at this point. They took a train to Paris and are still struggling with money, where they are trying clothes and walking down a runway after getting a makeover. A lot of money is given to them finally, and the next mission is to find their truck. Anyways, the episode ends with Billy and Michelle flirting with the same man that causes some slight issues between the two of them. So, Baloo is making up with a man she met a few days ago, though she's still with her boyfriend, and argues with the guy who wrote her a note about just wanting to be friends, where she wants to know when she'll see him again. Anyways, they are still in France and go to one of those famous chateaus in the country, and two princes were underdressed to greet them. So Blue finally does call her boyfriend to end the relationship, and he snaps at her, though we don't hear what he's saying at all. But we do see Baloo freaking out. Baloo then decides to snap at the entire cast because no one is opening up to her, and she is called out for not getting involved and opening herself up to them. But it's the entire house arguing with her at this time. Anyways, this does lead to Chris opening up about his past and trauma, and I guess this is why the two of them are on Battle of the Seasons together, and the entire cast do make up. For their next task, they have to surf, and they do meet a few guys that they're getting close to, who are the surfing instructors. The other two guys, so the one's not Antoine, who already has his hair dyed, end up dyeing their hair in unison together. After all of that and completing the task, they are bungee jumping off the bridge. Absolutely not. But the cast is agreeing to get along for the rest of the season, and they do uphold that. Michelle and Chris are getting flirty with one another, and he gives her his shirt to wear while they're laying in the bed. Something falls on Chris's head, and she tends to it, so they're getting a lot closer, clearly. They are now back in Spain, which is where they started the season, and they're at a beach party to promote the party. Sorry, they are handling posters to promote this beach party, and they have to actively go up to the naked people in the naked beach to hand tickets and posters. Chris and Michelle are flirting with one another. Sorry, they're flirting with other people in the club, and she kisses the other person, but they're both jealous. This ultimately doesn't really matter as the two of them end up getting closer to one another as he's handling her injury, but they both know that nothing will happen after the season since they live in opposite sides of the US. They are paragliding for their next task, and all of them realize that they're ending soon. So I'm sure they also realize that they are ending based on the schedule and the fact that they're back in Spain. It is the season finale, and they have to throw tomatoes, which is apparently some sort of Spanish tradition while they are in the middle of the road. But in order for this festival to start, someone has to climb a pole to get the ham at the top of the pole, and all this is just complete mayhem and very gross to watch. So I can only imagine how gross it was to actually be in it. They have to go to Barcelona for the reward, and they all know that it is the end. They get some of their stuff, and each of their flights are handled already. All of them have a final dinner and talking about their best moments in the season. It is the next morning, and they all say goodbye to one another, and they leave for their separate flights, as some leave early and some leave later in the day. Antoine was so interesting and kind of scary this season, but it was such a contrast to me watching him on Battle of the Sexes, where he was such an unnotable bore. So I'm kind of wondering what happened, or if it was maybe the guys who made him more boring. But he was definitely one. Yeah, he was the most interesting guy on the season by far. So Chris had his flirtment with Michelle throughout the season that had its moments here and there, and he was vulnerable a few times. Ultimately, not the most notable person on the season, but I didn't think anything of him on his brief run on the challenge. Anyways, just when I thought Baloo from the challenge or that version of her was insane, this version of Baloo takes it up 10 times a notch. She fought with damn near everybody. Almost all the arguments of the season involved her. She was cheating on her boyfriend. She was falling in love with people randomly and so quickly. Definitely kind of worrisome, but she was the most interesting person by far in the season. So, watching Michelle this season was kind of interesting because she didn't get much screen time on the challenge. She had her flirtments with Chris and a few other moments. I felt like she was the main narrator of the season. I, of course, have to talk about how she passed away, and it's unfortunate she passed away in a car crash, and she was so young. I believe it was like 5 or 6 years after the season. So, rest in peace to she and her cousin. So Patrice is the only one who hasn't done the challenge, and I'm not shocked at all because he was easily the most boring and forgettable person in the season, but he was very calm and level headed. But yeah, it's very easy to just forget about him, so I'm not shocked. This is the only thing he did regarding reality TV. So overall, I did enjoy the season. They weren't the least dynamic, but not the most dynamic. If I had to rank the first 3 seasons, I would have season 2 at the top, then season 3, then season 1. These 3 seasons are a good start to the franchise, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it evolves over the next decade and whether I can recognize some of the formulas that is consistent throughout the franchise, or certain things were established earlier on that they phase out, and some of the more formulaic stuff regarding the format is introduced later on. So I did find access, or I do have access to all the seasons. So I am going to complete all of the seasons. I was worried about that when I started watching Road Rules that I'd be missing several seasons because it was so hard to find many of them. But I do have access to all of them, so don't worry about them. So I'm probably going to post large videos like this when it comes to every 3 to 4 seasons because it's not much for me to talk about with a Road Rule season compared to a Real World season. So I'm going to combine 3 to 4 seasons and just talk about them and post that just like I did with this video. So the next video I'm going to do is probably going to cover seasons 4 to 6, maybe 4 to 7, depending on it. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon. Bye!